Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories every week, join our membership. Sit back, relax, and sip your coffee. Enjoy. The first time I watched someone die during a ceremony beneath the ancient redwoods, I felt nothing. Not horror, not disgust, not even surprise. Just a hollow acceptance that seemed to echo through the massive trunks surrounding our gathering. That's what terrifies me most when I look back. How quickly abnormal became normal. My name is Marcus Delaney. 3 years ago, I was finishing my theology doctorate at UC Berkeley, specializing in esoteric religious practices. My dissertation centered on how isolated communities develop unique spiritual frameworks. That's how I met Dr. Eleanor Voss, the department chair who would eventually introduce me to the luminous order of the Western Gate. Just an anthropological observation opportunity, she'd said, eyes never quite meeting mine across her cluttered office desk. They're selective, but I've mentioned your research. They're willing to let you document some of their practices. What Eleanor failed to mention was that the order had selected me long before I'd ever heard of them. They'd been watching me since my undergraduate work at Reed College, my papers on pre-Christian European rituals, my fascination with astronomical alignment in sacred architecture, even my childhood in Fortuna, less than 2 hours from their hidden temple complex in Humboldt County. I remember driving up Highway 101 that first evening, late October, the coastal fog rolling in as I passed through Garberville. My old Subaru struggled up the winding road that branched off toward Bull Creek. There's an area near the Rockefeller Forest where the redwoods grow so densely that daylight barely penetrates even at noon. By sunset, it was like driving into the throat of something ancient and hungry. The unmarked gravel road appeared exactly where the GPS coordinates indicated, though my phone had lost signal miles back. I almost missed it. Just a break in the ferns with a weathered wooden post displaying a small bronze symbol. A triangle with an eye, surrounded by antlers. Not the classic Illuminati eye most people would recognize, but close enough that I felt a flutter of excitement. Real academic fodder, I thought. At the clearing, 7 vehicles were already parked, a mix of luxury SUVs and sensible hybrids with Humboldt State and Berkeley parking stickers. People with money and education. Not the backwoods cult I'd half expected. The trail beyond the clearing was marked with small copper lanterns emitting a strange bluish light. They led to a circular meadow where about 30 people stood quietly, dressed in simple charcoal robes with deep hoods. In the meadow's center stood a stone altar, rough-hewn and ancient-looking, though I would later learn it had been installed in 1923 by the order's founder, Ambrose Blackwood, a lumber baron who claimed to have received visions while sleeping beneath the redwoods. Tonight marks the new moon ritual of November, my 3rd year serving as an initiated priest of the 7th Circle. I'm writing everything down now, because I'm not sure how much longer I can follow the rules. And breaking the rules here isn't like getting detention or a speeding ticket. Breaking the rules means ending up like Brother Simon did last winter solstice, his body twisted into shapes no human spine should allow, his eyes replaced with small blooming rhododendrons, still somehow blinking. So before I tell you about the rules, let me explain how quickly I went from observer to participant to believer. Because the most frightening thing about the luminous order isn't the entities they worship beneath the ancient trees. It's how rational, educated people like me can look into the void and convince themselves that serving it makes perfect sense. My first 3 months with the order were purely observational. I'd drive up from Berkeley every new moon, taking detailed notes on their ceremonies and interviewing members during daylight hours. The group appeared harmless at first. Wealthy intellectuals, tech executives, academics, and artists who gathered to connect with what they called the old awareness beneath the redwoods. Their leader, Martin Lockridge, was a former Stanford astrophysicist who'd left academia after receiving a substantial inheritance. Tall and lean with a neatly trimmed silver beard, he spoke with the measured cadence of someone used to giving lectures. When I asked what drew him to found this branch of the order, he smiled thinly. I didn't found anything, Marcus. I merely remembered what was already here. He gestured to the trees around us. These sentinels have stood for 2,000 years. They've absorbed the light of countless celestial events. They remember what came before the current arrangement. By current arrangement, I would later learn, he meant reality itself. December brought heavy rains to Northern California. The creek near the ritual grounds swelled, creating a persistent backdrop of rushing water during the winter solstice gathering. That night, I noticed changes in the ceremony. Additional symbols carved into the stone altar, participants wearing copper medallions over their hearts, and most significantly, the presence of something else in the clearing. I still struggled to describe it adequately. A density in the air, perhaps, a weight pressing against my eardrums, a sense that the space between trees had somehow folded in on itself, creating pockets where light behaved differently. After the ceremony, Eleanor approached me with an unusual necklace, a small vial containing what appeared to be tree sap suspended in clear liquid. You've shown dedication, Marcus. The council believes you're ready for initiation into the first circle. She placed it around my neck. Wear this during the January gathering. Don't remove it under any circumstances, even if it warms or moves against your skin. I should have asked more questions then. Should have noticed how her fingers trembled slightly as she secured the clasp. Instead, I felt a flush of academic pride, gaining insider access few researchers would ever achieve. The January ceremony changed everything. I arrived wearing the vial, which had begun emitting a faint amber glow as I approached the ritual grounds. The moment I stepped into the clearing, a splitting headache struck me. I saw the gathered members through a haze of pain, their forms stretching and contracting as if viewed through warped glass. Martin approached, placing his hands on my shoulders. The first barrier is always painful. Your mind resists seeing beyond its conditioning. Breathe through it. What followed was either a hallucination or my first glimpse behind what the order calls the veil of mundane perception. The redwoods appeared to breathe, their massive trunks expanding and contracting in slow rhythm. Between them moved shadow forms, neither human nor animal, flowing like dark water between the trees. Above, the stars shifted into configurations I had never seen in any astronomy textbook. When I regained normal awareness, I was kneeling before the stone altar, my hands pressed against carvings I couldn't recall seen before, spiraling patterns that seemed to move under my fingertips. The other members stood around me in a perfect circle, their hoods now drawn back. Martin handed me a leather-bound book, its cover unmarked except for the antlered eye symbol stamped in copper. "These are the preliminary observances," he said. "Study them carefully. Your continued presence among us depends on your adherence." That night in my cabin, a small structure the order maintained for visiting members, I read the book by lamplight. The first page contained a warning. The rules herein serve dual purpose: to protect the initiate and to maintain the integrity of the threshold. Violation invites correction from forces beyond mortal authority. The luminous order disclaims responsibility for consequences of willful non-compliance. The preliminary rules seemed straightforward, if odd. Never enter the ritual grounds except during designated ceremonies or with explicit council permission. Maintain a personal journal of dreams and visions. Burn any pages containing recurring symbols or entities immediately after transcription. Wear the provided amulet at all times within Humboldt County borders. Remove it only when crossing county lines. Speak of order activities only to confirmed members and only within order properties. Consume no alcohol or consciousness-altering substances not provided by the council. If you encounter wildlife behaving abnormally, staring, following, speaking, report it immediately to your circle guide without approaching the animal. Should you experience bleeding from eyes, ears, or fingernails, proceed directly to the sanctuary cabin and ring the copper bell 3 times. I dismiss these as mostly psychological conditioning tactics, ways to foster group cohesion through shared behaviors. A common anthropological phenomenon in exclusive societies. 2 weeks later, I discovered how wrong I was. I had returned to Berkeley, continuing my regular teaching schedule while analyzing my notes. One evening in my apartment, I removed the vial necklace while showering, breaking Rule 3, though I wasn't in Humboldt County. That night, I woke to find every faucet in my apartment running at full blast. When I tried to turn them off, the handles crumbled like dried clay. Water continued flowing, but what emerged wasn't clear. It ran thick and amber-colored, smelling of tree sap and copper. My phone lit up with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Replace the talisman. Stand in salt. Recite the first warding. I hadn't yet learned any wardings. The amber liquid rose quickly around my ankles. Within it, I glimpsed movement. Tiny, spiraling forms similar to the patterns on the altar stone. In panic, I grabbed the vial necklace, placed it around my neck, and ran outside. The moment I crossed my apartment threshold, the running water stopped. When I cautiously returned, all was normal. Faucets intact, floors dry. The next morning, Eleanor called. "You've experienced your first reminder," she said without preamble. "The rules aren't suggestions, Marcus. You'll need to decide if you're truly committed to this path." I was terrified. I was fascinated. I was hooked. "When can I learn the first warding?" I asked. She sighed, relieved. "Full moon. Come back to the grove." And so my real education began. By spring, I had abandoned any pretense that my involvement with the order was purely academic. I took a sabbatical from Berkeley, citing field research needs, and moved into a small cabin near Miranda, just 20 minutes from the ritual grounds. The locals knew me as another academic writing about redwood ecosystems. Humboldt County was full of researchers, environmentalists, and the occasional eccentric recluse. I blended in perfectly. Eleanor became my circle guide, teaching me the first warding, a sequence of gestures paired with phrases in a language that hurt my throat to pronounce. The words felt slippery, as if they were trying to crawl back down my esophagus rather than be spoken aloud. "It's not Latin or any human tongue," Eleanor explained as we practiced in a small clearing away from the main ritual grounds. "The language predates our species. The sounds create vibrations that disrupt certain frequencies." "What frequencies?" I asked, throat raw from practice. She glanced toward the towering redwoods, the ones that allow them to hear us. My initiation into the second circle came during the spring equinox. The ceremony required me to fast for 3 days beforehand, while drinking only a tea made from local mushrooms and redwood needles. By the time I arrived at the ritual grounds, my perception had already altered. Colors too vivid, sounds carrying emotional weight, the boundary between my skin and the air around me uncertain. Martin and the Council of Seven stood at the cardinal points around the altar. Each wore robes of different colors now. Martin in deep blue with silver embroidery, the others in green, amber, crimson, white, violet, and a black, so deep it seemed to swallow like. "The second circle brings responsibilities," Martin announced as I knelt before the altar. "You will serve as a listener during new moon gatherings." A woman in the amber robe, Dr. Amara Singh, a renowned biochemist I'd met during previous ceremonies, placed a copper bowl on the altar. Inside was a cloudy liquid that moved with an almost sentient swirl. "The essence of awareness," she explained, "derived from the oldest living trees in this grove. It allows temporary communion." I hesitated only briefly before drinking. The liquid tasted of earth and iron, with an underlying bitterness that made my jaw ache. Moments later, my hearing transformed. I could detect the minute crackling of sap in the surrounding trees, the distant heartbeats of sleeping birds, the whispered conversations of insects beneath the soil, and something else, something vast and patient moving through it all, like blood through veins. "Listen," Martin instructed, his voice somehow both a whisper and overwhelmingly loud. "Listen to what speaks between worlds." What I heard that night fundamentally altered my understanding of reality. Voices that seemed to emanate from the spaces between atoms, speaking of cosmic cycles, of openings between dimensions, of an approaching alignment that would thin the boundaries between what they called the breathing realm and the dreaming realm. As dawn approached, Martin handed me a new journal bound in bark cloth. "Your duties as listener begin tonight. The rules of your station are inscribed within quotation marks." Back in my cabin, still shaking from the experience, I read my new obligations. During all ceremonies, position yourself at the western point. Listen for voices from the hollow places. Transcribe all utterances precisely, regardless of comprehensibility. Should you hear your own name spoken by the voice in the trees, do not respond. Cover your left ear with soil and your right with ash. Never listen to recorded music through headphones within the forest boundaries. Sound channels must remain unclouded. If you begin hearing the voices outside of ceremonies, create a circle of iron nails around your sleeping area. Place a cup of salt water at the circle's center before sleeping. Should you dream of a red door standing alone among the trees, do not approach it, no matter who calls from beyond. Report such dreams immediately. When transcribing voices, use only the graphite pencils provided. Never ink. Never digital recording. If a transcription begins to change after writing, burn the page and scatter its ashes in running water before sunset. I followed these rules diligently through spring and into summer. The order became my world. My academic colleagues sent occasional emails. Was my research progressing? When would I return to teaching? I responded with vague updates, promising a groundbreaking dissertation that would revolutionize our understanding of modern esoteric practices. If only they knew how literal that promise was. June brought the summer solstice and my first major test as a listener. The ceremony began at sunset, the longest day of the year transitioning to night. Nearly 60 members gathered, the largest assembly I'd seen. Among them were faces I recognized from news articles and academic journals. Tech entrepreneurs, research scientists, a state senator, even a film director known for surrealist horror. The ritual proceeded differently this time. 7 sacrifices were made. Not human, but symbolic representations. A clay figure was broken at the altar's foot. Wine poured into the soil. A bird's feather burned. A crystal shattered. Salt dissolved in water. A book's pages scattered. A copper wire bent until it broke. 7 severances to thin the veil, Martin intoned. As listener, I sat cross-legged at the western point, journal open on my lap. When the final sacrifice completed, a profound silence fell over the gathering, not just an absence of human noise, but a cessation of all sound. No insects chirping, no wind in branches, nothing. Then the voices began. They emerged from between the massive redwood trunks, from underground, from the air itself. Multiple voices speaking simultaneously, some deep and resonant, others high-pitched and frantic. Some spoke recognizable languages, fragments of English, Latin, Mandarin, while others produced sounds no human vocal cords could create. My hand moved across the page almost automatically, creating swirling text and strange symbols that somehow captured the essence of what I heard. The voices spoke of convergences, of stellar alignments, of the opening eye of Alamoth, and children of dust reclaiming their forgotten heritage. Midway through the cacophony, I distinctly heard my name. Marcus Delaney bridges the threshold unwittingly. Remembering Rule 2, I quickly pressed my left hand into the soil and reached for the pouch of ash I kept in my robe pocket, covering my right ear. The moment I did, a sharp pain lanced through my head, followed by a vision. A massive eye opening in the night sky, stars rearranging into a pupil ringed by ancient symbols. After the ceremony, Martin examined my transcriptions with unusual intensity. His finger traced a particular symbol I'd drawn, a spiral intersected by 3 vertical lines. "You've captured the sign of opening," he said quietly, "earlier than expected." Eleanor looked worried. "The timetable's accelerating." "Adjust accordingly," Martin replied. "Prepare him for the 3rd circle. We'll need more listeners when the convergence begins." That night, I dreamed of standing in a grove I recognized from the ritual grounds. Before me stood a red door, ornately carved with symbols, matching those in my transcriptions. It stood alone among the trees, connected to no structure, its frame seemingly embedded in the air itself. From beyond the door, someone called my name in a voice identical to my mother's, which was impossible. She had died when I was 14. "Marcus, honey, I've been waiting so long. Please open the door." My dream self reached for the handle, a sick mixture of hope and dread churning in my stomach. Just before touching it, I remembered Rule 5 and pulled back. The voice changed instantly, dropping to an inhuman register. "You will open eventually, listener. All doors yield in time." I woke, drenched in sweat, the cabin air stifling despite the open windows. Following procedure, I immediately recorded the dream in my journal. As I wrote the final words, the ink began to move on the page, the letters rearranging themselves into that same spiral symbol from my transcriptions. With shaking hands, I tore out the page and burned it in my small wood stove, then took the ashes to the creek behind my cabin before sunrise. As I scattered them into the flowing water, I glimpsed something moving beneath the surface. A pale hand reaching upward before dissolving into the current. I was following the rules. I was doing everything right. But with each passing day, I sensed something awakening in the forest around me. Something that had noticed my presence and marked me for a purpose I was only beginning to comprehend. July brought intense heat to the Redwoods, unusual for the typically cool Northern California coast. The forest felt different, the air dense with moisture and the scent of warm resin. Birds fell silent during midday hours. Locals in Garberville and Myers Flat talked about the strange weather pattern, attributing it to climate change. The order knew better. During an emergency council meeting I was permitted to attend as a listener, Martin explained the true cause. "The thinning accelerates," he announced to the gathered council members in the small wooden structure they called the sanctuary, a hexagonal building nestled amid a circle of particularly massive redwoods. "The convergence approaches ahead of our calculations." Dr. Singh presented data on her tablet, astronomical charts, thermal readings from the ritual grounds, and audio spectrograms showing unusual frequency patterns detected throughout the grove. The threshold events have increased threefold since the solstice, she explained. We're recording an average of 17 anomalies daily. Rebecca Chen, the tech entrepreneur who wore the green robes on the council, asked the question everyone seemed reluctant to voice. Is the containment at risk? Martin's expression darkened. Not yet. But we must accelerate our preparations. All members must advance to their appropriate circles more quickly than tradition dictates. And so my initiation into the third circle came just 6 weeks after my second, breaking centuries of order protocol that typically required a full solar cycle between advancements. The ritual took place during a rare astronomical event, a meteor shower coinciding with a darkened moon. The preparations were more intense this time. I spent 3 days in isolation, in a small meditation hut deep in the forest. No food, only water infused with a red-tinged substance that Eleanor called essence of knowing. Each hour, a different council member would enter, place a copper disc on my forehead, and recite incantations before removing it and departing in silence. By the third day, my perception had altered dramatically. I could see faint luminous trails when people moved, lingering minutes after they departed. The trees outside the hut's small window appeared to pulse with internal light. When birds flew overhead, I could somehow see through their eyes momentarily, experiencing disorienting flashes of an aerial view of the forest. On the evening of the advancement ceremony, Eleanor led me to a part of the forest I'd never visited before, a ravine so deep the bottom remained in permanent shadow. Descending a treacherous path of switchbacks and hand-carved steps, we reached a natural cathedral formed by the exposed roots of ancient redwoods that grew along the ravine's edge. The entire council awaited us, along with 3 other adepts advancing to the third circle. David Chen, a quantum physics postdoc from Stanford, and Rebecca's nephew. Sophia Williams, a neurologist from UCSF, and Jason Whitaker, a software developer who'd made millions in cryptocurrency. The third circle grants the sight, but demands vigilance, Martin proclaimed as we stood before an underground spring that bubbled up from the ravine floor. To see beyond the veil is to become visible to what dwells beyond. Each council member added something to the spring water, drops from various vials, powders, crushed leaves, and finally, blood from their own fingertips. The water turned opalescent, shimmering with colors I had no names for. Drink and receive the covenant of the third circle, Martin instructed. The liquid burned like acid, then turned icy cold in my stomach. My vision fractured, splitting into multiple perspectives simultaneously. I saw the ravine from above, from below, from inside the trees themselves. I saw my own body from 7 different angles. Most disturbingly, I saw something vast and formless watching us from behind reality. A presence that existed in the negative spaces between objects, its awareness spreading like dark water through the forest. When my normal vision mostly returned, now permanently altered with a faint overlay of those other perspectives, Martin handed me a smooth stone tablet the size of my palm, covered in minute engravings. "Your new obligations," he said. "Memorize them before dawn. The stone dissolves in sunlight." Through my stinging eyes, I read the 7 commandments of the third circle. What you see with the sight must never be spoken aloud. Communicate such visions only through the cipher script you will learn. When you perceive watching entities, do not hold eye contact for more than 3 heartbeats. Do not speak to them unless spoken to first. If you see the red door while awake, inform a council member immediately. Do not approach it under any circumstances. Should you notice a council member behaving contrary to their nature, observe from a distance of no less than 12 feet. Record their actions in cipher and deliver the record to any other council member. Never sleep in direct moonlight. Always maintain a roof or canopy between yourself and the night sky. If you begin to see through the eyes of animals or other people without conscious effort, wear the copper blindfold until the merging passes. Should you witness the sign of opening appear on any surface, wood, stone, water, or flesh, depart from that location immediately and perform the second warding at a safe distance. I memorized these rules with the desperate intensity of someone who now understood the stakes. I'd seen enough to know these weren't arbitrary restrictions, but survival strategies against forces that operated according to entirely different laws of reality. Jason, however, seemed less convinced. As we hiked back up the ravine path in the pre-dawn darkness, he whispered to me, "Half of these rules are just power plays," he said. "The council keeps the good stuff for themselves, the real knowledge. You think this is about power?" I asked, genuinely surprised. After what I'd just experienced, human hierarchies seemed absurdly trivial. "Everything's about power," he smirked. "Why do you think all these high achievers are here? They want access to something that gives them an edge." I wanted to argue, to explain what I'd glimpsed during my vision, the vast watching presence that existed beyond conventional understanding of power or control. But Rule 1 forbade speaking of sight visions, so I remained silent. 2 weeks later, Jason broke Rule 5. Deliberately, it seemed. We were attending a preparation gathering before the August new moon ceremony. Many members were camping in designated areas near the ritual grounds. Around midnight, I woke needing to use the composting toilet the order maintained nearby. On my way back to my tent, I noticed Jason. He dragged his sleeping bag out from his tent and laid it in a small clearing, directly under the 3/4 moon. He was awake, staring upward, a notebook beside him. Documenting his experience, perhaps, seeking some insight or advantage. Following Rule 4, I kept my distance but observed him. Through my enhanced vision, I could see something alarming. The moonlight falling on him seemed to congeal, forming filaments like spider silk that adhered to his exposed skin. These strands glimmered with that same opalescent quality from the ravine spring. I should have reported it immediately. Instead, fascinated in the way only a former academic could be, I watched. The filaments multiplied, forming a cocoon of moonlight around Jason's recumbent form. His eyes remained open, blinking occasionally, but he made no move to brush away the strands or escape their embrace. After about 20 minutes, the cocoon began to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. Then the strands began to penetrate his skin. Jason's expression changed, first puzzlement, then discomfort, then terror. He tried to sit up, but found himself bound. He opened his mouth to call for help, but the filaments had already reached his vocal cords. His scream emerged as a strange harmonic tone that sent birds erupting from nearby trees. Finally breaking from my horrified trance, I ran to find Martin or another council member. I found Eleanor emerging from her cabin, already moving purposefully toward Jason's location. "You saw?" she asked. I nodded, unable to form words. "Rule 5 exists for a reason," she said grimly. "The moonlight thins in the month before the convergence. It becomes permeable." By the time we reached Jason, 4 other council members had arrived. They surrounded him, placing copper rods at precise intervals around the cocoon. Martin knelt beside Jason's head, now fully entwined in luminous strands, and spoke directly into his ear. "The choice remains yours, brother. Surrender to the claiming or resist with the 4th warding." A muffled sound emerged from Jason's wrapped form. Martin nodded solemnly. "As you wish." The council members began a complex ritual, burning herbs and reciting phrases that seemed to slice through the air. I watched as reality around Jason's cocoon folded inward, creating a pocket of distorted space-time. When the ritual concluded, Jason was gone. Not dead, something else entirely. Where his body had lain remained only a perfect circle of ash, with a spiral pattern etched in its center. "He has joined the Watchers," Eleanor explained later as we sat in the sanctuary. "His consciousness persists, but not in a form that can interact with our reality. He exists now as pure observation." "Could you have saved him?" I asked. "Had he chosen resistance through the fourth warding?" he asked. But he was curious about what lay beyond. That curiosity overcame his fear. She poured tea into my cup, a special blend that helped stabilize the sight. "Many who join the orders seek knowledge above all else. They must learn that some knowledge comes at a terrible price." Was it worth it for him? I couldn't help asking. Eleanor's expression was unreadable. "Ask me again after the convergence. If we survive, perhaps we'll gain the ability to communicate with the Watchers." That night, I dreamed of Jason. He stood before the red door, his body translucent and shimmering with that opalescent light. Unlike in my previous dream, the door stood slightly ajar. Through the gap poured moonlight of impossible brightness. Jason turned to me, his eyes now swirling vortices of light. "They're coming through, Marcus. Not just observing anymore. The convergence is their doorway." I woke, gasping for breath. The copper blindfold I now slept in askew on my face. Outside my cabin window, the redwoods seemed to lean inward, their massive trunks bending at subtle angles, but strained credulity and perception. Something fundamental was changing in the forest, in reality itself, and I was now bound by oath and terror to see it through to its conclusion. August brought new rules as the forest continued to change. The redwoods exuded more sap than usual, amber droplets that caught the light in ways that created momentary glimpses of other locations. A desert landscape, an underground cavern, a city skyline I didn't recognize. Deer moved through the underbrush with jerky, almost mechanical motions. Fog that rolled in each morning lingered in pockets that defied air currents, forming shapes like letters in an alphabet I almost recognized. The council issued emergency protocols to all Third Circle initiates and above. Maintain physical contact with redwood bark when traveling alone through the forest. Carry copper implements at all times, preferably items that can form a circle around yourself if needed. Should you encounter fog that moves against the wind, hold your breath until you've passed through it. If animals approach and form a semicircle around you, complete the circle yourself and remain at its center until they disperse. Never respond if the forest speaks your name, regardless of whose voice it uses. These new restrictions created a palpable tension among Order members. Many had joined seeking esoteric knowledge and personal advancement, not survival horror. After Jason's incident, 3 members of the Second Circle departed abruptly, breaking their oaths of commitment. 2 days later, Eleanor found their abandoned vehicle on Highway 101 near Wyatt, empty except for 3 copper amulets on the front seat and a strange residue on the dashboard that spelled out "returned" when viewed through the sight. The defector's fate became a cautionary tale that kept the remaining members in line, though murmurs of dissent continued. David Chen, who had advanced to the Third Circle with me, became my confidant during this period. As a physicist, he approached the phenomena with analytical curiosity, rather than mystical reverence. The convergence represents a thinning of quantum barriers between parallel realities, he theorized as we conducted our assigned task of checking the copper boundary markers that encircled the ritual grounds. The rules work because they exploit physical principles we don't yet understand. Like primitive cultures, discovering antibiotics through trial and error before germ theory existed. "So you don't believe in the entities?" I asked, carefully stepping over a line of mushrooms that had grown in a perfect hexagon overnight. David adjusted his glasses. I believe something exists in adjacent dimensional space that can interact with our reality under specific conditions. Whether these are sentient entities or just different physics manifesting, that's semantics. Our conversation was interrupted by a scream from deeper in the forest. We ran toward the sound, finding Sophia kneeling beside a small pond. The water's surface rippled with images, faces pressing outward as if trying to emerge, mouths opening and closing silently. It spoke to me, she gasped, pointing at the pond. Using my mother's voice, but she's been dead for 12 years. I remembered Rule 5 of the emergency protocols. Never respond if the forest speaks your name, regardless of whose voice it uses. Did you answer it? David asked urgently. Sophia hesitated. I started to, just said Mom, before I caught myself. The water in the pond began to rise in a column, still displaying those pressing faces. David reacted instantly, pulling copper dowsing rods from his pack and placing them in a circle around us. The second warding, he told Sophia. Now. Together, we performed the ritual gestures and guttural phrases I'd learned months earlier. The water column shuddered, faces contorting in silent screams, then collapsed back into the pond. The surface froze instantly despite the summer heat, a layer of ice forming that displayed that now familiar spiral symbol. We reported the incident to the council immediately. Martin ordered the pond drained and the ground salted. Another threshold point forming, he muttered. They're multiplying faster than we can contain them. That evening, the council summoned all Third Circle members to the sanctuary. Martin looked haggard, his silver beard untrimmed, dark circles under his eyes. The approaching convergence necessitates accelerated advancement, he announced. All of you will enter the Fourth Circle tonight, without the traditional preparation period. Dr. Singh stepped forward. The Fourth Circle grants the voice, the ability to speak to what exists beyond the veil. Her tone held warning rather than celebration. This gift comes with great risk. The voice creates direct connection. What you speak to can speak back and can find you. My stomach nodded. I thought of Jason, now existing as pure observation among the Watchers. What would happen to those who could speak to such entities? The advancement ritual was rushed and brutal. No isolation period, no gradual preparation. The 7 of us knelt before the council as they painted symbolic patterns on our throats, using a crimson substance that burned like acid. We drank a bitter black liquid that numbed our tongues, then breathed vapors from smoldering herbs that made the air shimmer around us. When I tried to speak afterward, my voice emerged with a faint echo, as if each word repeated into infinite distance before returning. The forest seemed to lean closer whenever I spoke, trees bending subtly inward to catch the sound. Martin handed each of us a small silver whistle. Your emergency silencer. If your voice begins drawing unwanted attention, blow the whistle and remain silent for 12 hours afterward. The new rules came not on stone or paper, but directly into our minds as burning sensations behind our eyes. Speak to no entity without first establishing a copper boundary. Never use the voice to call anything toward you. Only send away. Don't speak aloud while dreaming. Bind your mouth with silver thread when sleeping. Should you feel compelled to speak words you don't understand, blow the whistle immediately. Never teach the voice techniques to anyone, including other order members. If you hear multiple voices emerge when you speak, separate your consciousness using the 5th warding until a single voice returns. Should your voice begin attracting animals or insects, submerge your head in running water until they disperse. That night, I couldn't sleep. The weight of advancement pressed on me like a physical burden. I'd never sought this power or responsibility. I'd come as a researcher, an observer. Now I was a participant in something that threatened reality itself. Around 3 a.m., I left my cabin, needing fresh air. The forest felt alive in a way that transcended metaphor. It was literally conscious, aware of my presence. The spaces between trees seemed to watch me. The ground appeared to shift subtly beneath my feet, adjusting to my steps. I reached a small clearing and sat on a fallen log, forgetting momentarily that I should maintain contact with living redwood bark as per the emergency protocols. As soon as I realized my error, I felt it, a change in the air pressure, a listening presence. Marcus. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a soft feminine whisper that sounded eerily like Eleanor. But I knew the rules. I remained silent, reaching for my pocket where I kept a coil of thin copper wire. Marcus Delaney, we've been patient. The voice changed, becoming multiple voices speaking in perfect unison. Man, woman, child, and something else that scraped against my eardrums. I began forming the copper wire into a circle around myself, my hands trembling. The voices continued. You document but do not understand. You follow arbitrary limitations set by those who delay the inevitable. The clearing darkened as if clouds had covered the moon, but looking up, I saw the sky was clear. The darkness emanated from the spaces between trees, negative light flowing like liquid. The convergence comes with or without human participation. The order merely negotiates terms of surrender. I completed the copper circle and began the second warding. My new voice, giving the guttural syllables a resonance that vibrated through the clearing. The darkness receded slightly. Ask Martin what happened to Ambrose Blackwood. The voices said, now fading. Ask what sacrifice begins the convergence. I finished the warding ritual, and the forest returned to normal, or what passed for normal these days. Heart pounding, I gathered my copper wire and hurried back toward my cabin. As I approached, I saw Eleanor waiting on my porch, her expression grim. You spoke to them, she said, not a question. I performed the warding, I replied defensively. I followed protocol. You left your cabin without maintaining bark contact. You sat on dead wood. Her voice was flat, disappointed. Every rule exists for a reason, Marcus. The voices mentioned Ambrose Blackwood, I said, and a sacrifice. Eleanor's face paled in the moonlight. Come with me. Now the council needs to know they're communicating directly. As we walked toward the sanctuary, I stole a glance back at my cabin. For a brief moment, I saw it transformed. The wooden structure replaced by a familiar red door standing alone in the darkness, slightly ajar. I blinked, and my cabin returned to normal. But the message was clear. The boundaries were thinning, and the rules might not be enough to protect us anymore. The sanctuary hummed with urgent activity when Eleanor and I arrived. Council members moved with purpose, gathering ancient texts and digital equipment alike. Rebecca Chem supervised 2 assistants who mounted copper plates over each window. Dr. Singh mixed substances in glass beakers, the liquids shifting colors in ways that defied chemistry. Martin stood at the center of the hexagonal room, studying the holographic display projected from a device that looked centuries ahead of current technology. It showed the forest from above, with glowing points marking what I assumed were threshold locations. The points had multiplied since I'd last seen such a map, now numbering in the dozens. Marcus encountered voices in the western quadrant, Eleanor announced. They mentioned Ambrose specifically, and the sacrifice. The room fell silent. Martin's face tightened as he looked at me. Tell us exactly what was said, word for word. I recounted the experience, my voice giving the words that unsettling echo even within the sanctuary's walls. When I finished, Martin exchanged glances with the other council members. "It's time he knows," Dr. Singh said quietly. "All Fourth Circle members should be informed before the convergence." Martin nodded reluctantly. "Prepare the Blackwood archives." While Dr. Singh retrieved materials from a hidden compartment beneath the floor, Martin gestured for me to sit. "You've proven your dedication to the Order, Marcus. But what I'm about to share will test your commitment in ways you cannot imagine." His eyes held mine. "Many who learn the truth choose to leave, or worse." "I just want to understand what's happening," I replied. "Why the forest is changing, what these entities want, what the convergence really means." "Those questions have the same answer," Martin said as Dr. Singh returned with a worn leather journal and what appeared to be an old film reel. "The complete truth of Ambrose Blackwood." Over the next hour, I learned the hidden history of the Order, a narrative far different from the sanitized version I'd been told initially. Ambrose Blackwood hadn't been a lumber baron who received visions. He was a theoretical physicist who abandoned academia in the early 1900s after discovering what he called fracture points in reality, locations where our dimension connected to others. The redwood forests contained an unusually high concentration of these points, particularly in the ancient groves where the massive trees had stood for thousands of years. Through experiments combining cutting-edge physics with ritual practices borrowed from various esoteric traditions, Blackwood learned to perceive these fracture points. Eventually, he established communication with entities that existed beyond conventional reality, beings of pure consciousness that called themselves the Watchers. The entities claimed to be humanity's progenitors, Martin explained, as we watched footage from the 1920s showing Blackwood's early experiments. The grainy black and white film showed a tall, gaunt man moving through the forest, stopping at seemingly random points to place strange devices against tree trunks. Where he did, the film showed disturbing distortions, as if reality itself warped around the equipment. Blackwood became convinced that human consciousness evolved through their influence, Martin continued. They claimed that periodically, when certain cosmic alignments occur, a convergence happens, a thinning of dimensional barriers that allows greater interaction between our reality and theirs. The final segment of film showed a ritual in the same clearing we now used. Roughly 30 people in simple robes stood in a circle while Blackwood directed their movements. As the ritual progressed, the film captured something extraordinary. The air above the altar seemed to fold inward, creating a vortex of darkness. Within it, shapes moved, vaguely humanoid but wrong in proportion and movement. "The first contact," Eleanor said softly. "Blackwood's triumph." "And his doom," added Martin grimly. The journal contained Blackwood's personal account of what followed. The entities offered knowledge and power beyond human understanding, but at a price. Each convergence required what they called a threshold sacrifice. Living consciousness, surrendered willingly to anchor the dimensional opening. Blackwood, in his zealous pursuit of knowledge, offered himself. He believed he would achieve transcendence, Martin said, as I read the final journal entry, dated November 11th, 1923. Instead, he became something neither human nor watcher. A consciousness trapped between realities, in perpetual agony. The journal's final pages contained drawings of the spiral symbol I'd seen repeatedly, what Blackwood called the sign of opening, and frantic warnings about the true nature of the Watchers. They do not wish communion, but consumption. They hunger for consciousness itself. What they offer as transcendence is absorption. What they promise as evolution is extinction. The Luminous Order was founded after Blackwood's sacrifice, Martin explained. Not to serve the Watchers, but to contain them. To maintain the barriers between realities and prevent a full convergence. I struggled to process this revelation. But the rituals, the advancements, everything we do seems designed to thin the barriers, not strengthen them. Controlled release prevents catastrophic rupture, Dr. Singh interjected. Like managing pressure in a volcanic system, small regulated eruptions prevent a cataclysmic explosion. Each convergence cycle requires management, Martin continued. The Watchers will break through regardless. The cosmic alignment guarantees it. Our rituals control where and how the breakthrough occurs, limiting its scope and duration. A terrible understanding dawned on me. And the sacrifice, is that also necessary? The council members exchanged glances again. Yes, Martin finally admitted. One consciousness must bridge the gap, a willing sacrifice who becomes the anchor and regulator of the threshold, like Blackwood did a century ago. The current cycle ends in November, Eleanor added, on the 100th anniversary of the first contact. And who will be sacrificed this time? I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. The council selects a candidate from the fourth circle initiates, Martin replied, not meeting my eyes. Someone whose consciousness vibrates at a frequency compatible with the threshold requirements. Someone like me, I whispered, the echo of my voice making the words seem to repeat endlessly. That's why you accelerated my advancement. You're preparing me as a potential sacrifice. You're one of several candidates, Dr. Singh clarified, as if that somehow made it better. The final selection hasn't been made. My mind raced through everything I'd experienced, the special attention, the rapid advancements, the unique reactions I'd had to the rituals. I wasn't special because of my academic background or spiritual potential. I was special because my consciousness was suitable for consumption. This is why we have rules, Eleanor said, placing a hand on my arm. They protect both us and the world while we perform our necessary function. Blackwood's sacrifice prevented a full convergence that would have allowed the Watchers complete access to our reality. Think of the barriers between dimensions as a dam, Martin added. The convergence is a flood. We can't stop the water, but we can channel it through controlled spillways. Without the sacrifice, the dam breaks completely. Before I could respond, Rebecca burst through the sanctuary door. Threshold breach in progress. Northern sector. Martin turned to the holographic display. One of the glowing points had expanded dramatically, pulsing with alarming intensity. Containment protocol, he ordered. All council members and fourth circle initiates respond. As we rushed to gather the necessary implements, copper rods, iron filings, ritual components, Martin pulled me aside. I understand your fear and anger, Marcus, but right now, we need your help. After we contain this breach, you'll have a choice. Remain with us and accept whatever duty the Order requires, or leave with your knowledge and memories intact. You'd let me leave? Even knowing what I know? I asked incredulously. Free will is sacred to our cause. We use rules and rituals, but never coercion. A forced sacrifice would doom the convergence to failure. His eyes held genuine compassion. Blackwood understood this. His willing sacrifice saved countless lives. We traveled in tense silence to the breach location, a small clearing about a mile from the main ritual grounds. What we found there defied comprehension. A section of air approximately 10 feet in diameter had inverted. The only way I can describe it is that reality itself had turned inside out in that specific spot. Through the opening, I glimpsed a landscape that hurt my eyes to perceive. Structures of impossible architecture, entities moving in patterns that violated physics. colors that seemed to scream rather than shine. 4 Second Circle members lay unconscious around the anomaly, apparently having discovered the breach and been overwhelmed. Dr. Singh checked their vitals while the rest of us quickly established a copper boundary. Using our voice in careful unison, the 4th Circle initiates began the 3rd warding, while council members reinforced our efforts with more advanced techniques. The inverted section of reality resisted, the opening actually growing larger for several terrifying minutes before our combined efforts began to affect it. As we worked, I noticed something disturbing. The unconscious order members on the ground were changing, their bodies elongating slightly, fingers extending, facial features shifting in subtle ways that suggested they were being rewritten by proximity to the breach. Finally, after nearly an hour of continuous effort, the breach collapsed with a sound like thunder that wasn't quite sound at all, more a pressure wave that rippled through consciousness itself. The 4 affected members were quickly stabilized with copper brackets placed around their wrists and necks, though their altered appearance remained. "They'll need specialized treatment," Dr. Singh said grimly. "Quantum recalibration to restore their original pattern." As we helped transport the injured back to the sanctuary, I had time to reflect on my options. The Order's methods were extreme, their secrecy concerning, and their willingness to sacrifice members disturbing. Yet, I'd seen the alternative. The chaos that would emerge if the barriers fell completely. Back at the sanctuary, while the medical team worked on the injured, Martin approached me again. "Have you decided?" he asked quietly. "I need to know something first," I replied. "Are the Watchers what traditional religions would call demons? Is this a battle between good and evil?" Martin shook his head. "Such dualistic thinking doesn't apply. The Watchers aren't evil. They're fundamentally different. Their reality operates on principles incompatible with our own. To them, absorbing consciousness is natural, as breathing is to us. And the convergence can't be prevented entirely? No, the cosmic cycles are beyond our control. We can only manage the intersection points where realities meet." I thought of Jason, now existing as pure observation. Of Blackwood, trapped between dimensions for a century. Of the 4 Order members, their very humanity altered by brief exposure to the other side. If I were selected as the sacrifice, I asked carefully, what would happen to me? "Your consciousness would remain intact but expanded beyond normal parameters," Martin answered with uncomfortable honesty. "You would exist at the threshold, maintaining the barrier through your distributed awareness. It's not death in the conventional sense, but it's not life either. Blackwood still communicates occasionally, through dreams and visions. The weight of the choice pressed down on me. Leave and hope the Order found another sacrifice, knowing the convergence would happen regardless of my participation. Or stay and potentially offer myself to a fate worse than death to protect a world that would never know the danger it faced. Before I could respond, the sanctuary's lights flickered. The holographic display showing threshold points throughout the forest suddenly flared with new activity, dozens of new points appearing simultaneously. "Multiple breaches forming," Rebecca announced, her voice tense. "This isn't normal cycle progression." Martin's face drained of color. "They're forcing the convergence ahead of schedule. Someone has broken containment rule 0. The council members looked at each other in alarm. I realized there was a rule even I hadn't been told about yet. "What's containment rule 0? I asked. Eleanor answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Never summon a Watcher by its true name." As if in response to her words, a low vibration began to build throughout the forest. Outside the sanctuary windows, the mighty redwoods swayed not from wind, but from something passing through reality itself. A presence vast beyond comprehension, awakening after a century of dreams. Chaos erupted in the sanctuary. Council members rushed to workstations, activating emergency protocols, while initiates gathered equipment for field containment. Through the windows, I saw the sky darkening despite the afternoon hour. Clouds swirling in formations that resembled that familiar spiral pattern. The sign of opening now written across the heavens. Who would summon a watcher by name? I asked Eleanor as we packed copper implements into field kits. Everyone knows the consequences. Not everyone believes the consequences, she replied grimly. Some see the Watchers as potential allies or sources of power. The Luminous Order has always had dissenters. Martin's voice cut through the commotion. Multiple breach locations confirmed. Primary expansion in Sector 5, the Rockefeller Loop Trail. He turned to address the gathered members. We're implementing Contingency Protocol Omega. All initiates below 4th Circle evacuate to the secondary containment facility in Mendocino. 3rd and 4th Circle members will establish containment barriers at designated coordinates. He gestured to a display showing the map of the forest with 7 points marked in red. Council members will attempt primary sealing at the central breach. This is not a drill. Reality integrity is compromised. Eleanor gripped my arm. Marcus, go with the evacuation group. You haven't completed full training for Omega scenarios. I hesitated. Despite my horror at learning I might be sacrificed, I couldn't abandon these people, or ignore what I'd seen of the alternative. I'm staying, I decided. I've seen what comes through the breaches. I can help. Before she could argue, Rebecca interrupted. We've identified the source of the naming. Security footage from Eastern Perimeter, timestamp 40 minutes ago. The display shifted to show grainy footage of a hooded figure moving through the forest, stopping at a specific redwood and pressing something against its trunk. As the figure turned, their hood fell back, revealing their face. Sophia Williams, the neurologist who'd advanced to the 3rd Circle with me. Replay audio, Martin ordered. The system enhanced the sound. Sophia's voice emerged clearly, speaking a name that didn't register in my human hearing. A sound like static interference mixed with the groaning of massive trees. The effect was immediate. The air around her distorted, and a dark substance like liquid shadow began seeping from the tree. Why would she do this? Dr. Singh whispered. She knows the protocols. Locate her, Martin ordered. Full biometric scan. Rebecca typed rapidly. No vital signs registering. Last biometric ping places her at the central breach point. She's given herself to them, Eleanor realized. A willing sacrifice, but outside the containment framework. An uncontrolled opening, Martin said, his voice heavy with dread. The worst-case scenario. The building shuddered as something like an earthquake rippled through the ground. Outside, several redwoods creaked ominously, their massive trunks bending at angles that wood should not sustain without breaking. Martin made a quick decision. Implement the boundary reinforcement immediately. All available personnel to their designated points. I was paired with David Chen and assigned to the northwestern boundary point. We grabbed our equipment and headed out in one of the Order's electric vehicles. The forest had transformed during the brief time we'd been in the sanctuary. The trees seemed to flicker between states, sometimes solid, sometimes translucent, sometimes revealing glimpses of that other reality within their trunks. The ground beneath our tires occasionally became insubstantial, causing the vehicle to drop several inches before reality reasserted itself. She was asking questions about the Watchers for weeks, David said as we navigated the increasingly treacherous road, about whether they might be misunderstood, whether the Order had misinterpreted their intentions. You think she believed she could communicate with them, Negotiate? I asked. Worse. I think she believed their promises. He swerved to avoid a section of road that had begun to ripple like water. The Watchers can be persuasive. They offer knowledge, power, transcendence. They just don't mention the price. We reached our designated coordinates, a small clearing with an ancient redwood at its center, its trunk wider than my cabin. Following protocol, we quickly established a copper boundary, driving rods into the ground at precise intervals and connecting them with wire. As we worked, I noticed movement in the surrounding forest, animals gathering, deer, foxes, countless birds, even a black bear standing unnaturally still at the tree line, all watching us with an intelligence that wasn't their own. David, I said quietly, Rule 4 of the emergency protocols. He glanced up, noticing the semicircle of wildlife. Without a word, we moved to stand back to back, completing the circle with our bodies. The fourth warding, he whispered. Now. Together, we performed the complex series of gestures and vocalizations, our voices creating harmonics that seemed to cut through the dimensional static building around us. The animals remained, watching but not approaching. We had just completed the boundary when our communication devices activated. Martin's voice came through, distorted but understandable. Central breach expanding beyond containment capacity. Sophia has merged with the threshold. She's changing the rules of the interaction. What does that mean? I asked into the device. The sacrifice is meant to reinforce barriers, not dissolve them. She's inverted the process. His voice crackled with interference. All boundary teams initiate warding sequence 5 immediately. David looked at me with alarm. We haven't been taught sequence 5. That's fifth circle knowledge. The device crackled again as Eleanor broke in. Marcus David, the sequence data is being transmitted to your tablets. Follow it precisely. There's no time for proper training. Our tablets activated, displaying complex diagrams and phonetic notations for sounds I wasn't sure human vocal cords could produce. The instructions indicated that the sequence required both blood offering and synchronized voicing. As we studied the unfamiliar material, the massive redwood at the center of our clearing began to transform. Its bark rippled, forming faces that pushed outward as if trying to emerge. Sap oozed from these formations, black rather than amber, falling to the ground where it continued to move with apparent purpose. The semicircle of animals had grown denser, more creatures joining the silent watchers. Their eyes reflected light that had no source in our reality. "We need to hurry," David said, already using his ritual knife to make a shallow cut across his palm. I did the same, wincing at the pain. Following the instructions, we pressed our bleeding hands against the copper boundary rods, then began the complex vocalization. The words burned my throat, each syllable feeling like swallowing broken glass. My vision, gained in the third circle, showed waves of energy emanating from our boundary, pushing back against a tide of otherworldly force. Halfway through the sequence, David suddenly stopped, clutching his throat. Blood seeped between his fingers as he tried to continue the chant. I kept going, desperately trying to maintain the warding alone, but the energy pattern faltered. The redwood's transformation accelerated. The trunk split open like a doorway, revealing not the expected interior of a tree, but a vast space filled with twisting geometries and flowing darkness. Within that darkness, forms moved, elongated silhouettes that bore vague resemblance to human shape, but stretched and folded in ways that defied anatomy. David collapsed, blood now flowing from his eyes and ears as well. The tablet displayed the final sequence, but I couldn't complete it alone. In desperation, I activated the communication device. Boundary 7 compromised. David is down. I can't complete the warding. Only static responded. We were cut off. The darkness from the tree doorway began flowing outward, forming tendrils that probed the copper boundary. Where they touched the metal, it corroded instantly, turning to dust. I made a desperate decision. Remembering what I had learned about the voice, I abandoned the formal warding sequence and instead spoke directly to the darkness, using my enhanced vocal abilities to project my consciousness toward the breach. I offer negotiation, by the right of potential sacrifice. The darkness paused. The tendrils withdrew slightly. From within the doorway, a voice responded, not in sound, but directly in my mind. Marcus Delaney, listener, speaker, potential bridge. The voice felt vast, ancient, curious in the way a scientist might be curious about bacteria in a petri dish. Your order constrains. The female opener has shown another path. Barriers dissolve. Convergence accelerates. Sophia misunderstands. I projected, hoping my voice carried the meaning clearly. Uncontrolled convergence destroys both realities. Balance requires structure. An impression of amusement touched my mind. Your understanding is limited by dimensional constraints. We do not destroy. We absorb. We elevate. The copper boundary continued to disintegrate. David lay motionless on the ground. I was running out of options. Show me, I challenged. Before consuming this reality, show me what you offer. If it truly elevates, I will help you. I will become a willing bridge. The darkness paused again, considering. Then it surged forward, engulfing me before I could react. I experienced countless realities simultaneously. Worlds where physics operated under different laws, where consciousness existed without physical form, where time moved in loops or branches rather than linear progression. I saw the Watchers as they truly were, not entities, but a state of being, a level of existence that encompassed multidimensional awareness. And I saw their hunger, their need to absorb consciousness, not out of malice, but out of a fundamental drive as basic as our need for food or air. They didn't hate humanity. They simply saw us as we might see natural resources, something to be harvested and utilized. They had been influencing Earth for millennia, guiding evolution toward consciousness complex enough to sustain them. The convergence wasn't a natural cosmic event. It was a cultivated harvest, occurring when the crop of consciousness had ripened sufficiently. As this understanding flooded my mind, I also glimpsed Sophia. She hadn't been deceived. She'd made a calculated choice. By offering herself outside the containment framework, she disrupted the careful balance the Order had maintained for a century. She believed that fighting the inevitable only prolonged suffering. Better to surrender and allow humanity to be elevated into the Watcher's consciousness. The darkness withdrew, returning me to the clearing. David still lay unconscious, but breathing. The copper boundary was nearly gone, the redwood doorway now fully open. You understand now. Will you help us, Marcus Delaney? I had seconds to decide. The Order's century of containment had only delayed the inevitable. Sophia's action had accelerated it. Either way, the convergence was happening. The only question was whether it would occur with some measure of control or in chaotic dissolution of reality itself. I thought of Ambrose Blackwood, trapped in the threshold for 100 years. I thought of Jason, transformed into a Watcher. I thought of the 4 Order members, their bodies rewritten by brief exposure to the other side, and I made my choice. I will help you, I said to the waiting darkness, but not as Sophia has, not through uncontrolled dissolution. A ripple passed through the shadowy tendrils. Curiosity, perhaps, or amusement. Explain your proposal, bridge candidate. I stepped forward, placing myself between David's unconscious form and the open doorway in the redwood. The Order's method of controlled sacrifice maintains balance. Sophia's approach risks destroying both realities through unregulated merging. I was improvising desperately, drawing on everything I'd learned about the Watchers and the Convergence. I offer myself as the traditional bridge, but with a modification to the containment framework. The darkness seemed to consider this, coiling around itself like living smoke. Around us, the animals watching from the forest edge began to make strange, synchronized movements, heads tilting at identical angles, bodies swaying in perfect unison. The female opener has already altered the process. Containment parameters are compromised. Then help me restore them, I challenged. If consciousness is what you value, chaos serves neither of us. Controlled absorption preserves the integrity of what you seek to harvest. I was gambling everything on what I'd glimpsed during my brief immersion in the Watcher's perspective, that they were methodical, patient entities who had invested millennia in cultivating human consciousness. Surely they wouldn't risk damaging their crop through hasty harvesting. A new presence made itself known, a ripple in the darkness that somehow conveyed a different identity among the collective awareness. The Delaney proposal has merit. The Blackwood framework maintained optimal absorption rates without dimensional degradation. Another voice joined in. The female opener's acceleration threatens containment integrity across all affiliated groves. With a jolt, I realized what this meant. The convergence wasn't limited to our forest. Similar breaches must be occurring in ancient groves worldwide, all coordinated through some aspect of the Watcher's multidimensional awareness. What modifications do you propose, Marcus Delaney? I thought quickly. The traditional sacrifice places one consciousness at the threshold as a regulator. I propose a rotating stewardship, multiple consciousness vessels sharing the burden, each serving limited duration before being released. This was a desperate gambit. I had no idea if such an arrangement was possible, but I needed to buy time and find a way to reestablish the containment barriers. The darkness writhed, tendrils reaching toward me but stopping just short of contact. Inefficient. Consciousness fragmentation reduces harvest quality, but increases long-term yield, I countered. Burning through your crop too quickly depletes the field. I felt rather than heard the equivalent of discussion among the Watchers, a complicated exchange of concepts that transcended language. As they deliberated, I carefully reached into my pocket for my copper whistle. If I could activate the emergency silence protocol, maybe I could temporarily sever the connection Sophia had established. Before I could act, the forest around us transformed. The trees became transparent, revealing the countless breaches now opening throughout the grove. Through each one poured that same darkness, tendrils reaching into our reality and reshaping it. The sky above had turned the color of a bruise, the spiral pattern now a vast vortex centered above the main ritual grounds. Through this nightmarish landscape, I saw figures running, Order members attempting containment procedures, most failing as the boundaries between dimensions continued to dissolve. In the distance, the sanctuary glowed with copper-colored light, apparently still holding against the incursion. Approach the threshold, Marcus Delaney. Demonstrate your intent. I hesitated, glancing at David's still form. Whatever I decided would affect not just me, but everyone. Order members, the surrounding communities, potentially the entire world if the convergence continued spreading. Making my decision, I stepped forward to the edge of the redwood doorway. The darkness beyond pulsed with awareness. Countless consciousnesses swirling in patterns too complex for human minds to comprehend. I could sense Sophia among them, not dissolved but transformed. Her awareness expanded but fragmented, distributed throughout the collective. I need to establish the proper framework first, I insisted. The original Blackwood containment protocols must be implemented. Protocols, unnecessary, surrender sufficient. Not for optimal integration, I argued. Ambrose Blackwood understood the correct vibrational alignment. That's why his sacrifice lasted a century. I was stalling, desperately trying to think of a way out of this situation. The copper whistle still rested in my pocket, but using it would only silence me temporarily. It wouldn't close the breaches already opened. A sudden movement caught my attention. David had regained consciousness and was slowly reaching for his tablet. Our eyes met briefly, and I understood. He was accessing the emergency protocols while the watchers focused on me. I needed to keep them engaged. "Show me Ambrose Blackwood," I demanded. "Let me speak with him before I make my final decision." The darkness rippled again, and a form began to coalesce within the doorway, humanoid but distorted, like a reflection in troubled water. It vaguely resembled the man from the old films, tall and gaunt, but his features constantly shifted, and parts of him seemed to fade in and out of existence. Marcus Delaney. The voice was barely human, crackling like radio interference. "You follow my path." "Ambrose," I acknowledged. "Tell me the truth about the convergence. Is there a way to maintain the balance without sacrifice?" The apparition flickered, parts of it stretching into impossible geometries before snapping back to human form. "No balance without anchor. Consciousness must bridge the dimensions. And your experience? These 100 years of the threshold. Awareness expanded, pain transcended, time meaningless." His form destabilized further, but not what they promised. Behind me, I could hear David whispering the warding sequence. I needed just a little more time. "What do you mean, Ambrose? What did they promise you?" "Godhood, received, slavery." The apparition began to dissolve, the darkness pulling it back into the collective. "Beware. False. Ascension." With a final effort, Blackwood's form lunged forward, his features briefly stabilizing as he locked eyes with me. "The rules. Protect both sides of the threshold. Without containment, both realities collapse." The darkness surged forward, reclaiming Blackwood's consciousness and reaching for me. I stumbled backward, narrowly avoiding contact. "Enough delay. Decide, Marcus Delaney." Behind me, David had managed to complete part of the warding sequence. A thin barrier of copper-colored energy was beginning to form around our clearing. The watching animals had begun to retreat, their movements becoming erratic as the watchers' control faltered. I made my final decision. Pulling out the silver whistle, I blew it with all my strength, activating the silence protocol that would temporarily sever my voice's connection to the dimensional threshold. At the same time, I pulled a copper rod from our equipment and drove it into the ground directly before the redwood doorway. "I reject your offer," I declared, my voice fading with each word as the whistle's effect took hold. "I will not be your bridge." The darkness roiled with what I could only interpret as rage. Tendrils lashed out, but the partial warding David had established deflected them. Around us, the animals fled into the forest, no longer under external control. David struggled to his feet, blood still staining his face. Together, we completed the emergency warding sequence, establishing a temporary boundary around the breach. "We need to get to the sanctuary," he gasped. "This won't hold long." We grabbed our remaining equipment and ran for the vehicle. Behind us, the redwood doorway pulsed with darkness that strained against our hastily erected barriers. The forest around us continued its transformation. trees bending at impossible angles, sections of ground becoming transparent to reveal other landscapes beneath. The air itself seeming to fold and unfold in nauseating patterns. As we drove, navigating a landscape that changed moment by moment, our communication device suddenly activated. Martin's voice came through stronger than before. "Attention all Order members. Primary containment established at the central breach. Sophia has been contained. Report status of boundary wardings." David responded, explaining our situation as I drove. The sanctuary came into view, now surrounded by a dome of copper-colored energy that held back the encroaching darkness. Order members hurried about, reinforcing the barriers with additional copper implements and performing continuous wardings. Inside, Martin greeted us grimly. His right arm was gone, not injured but simply absent, as if that portion of reality had been selectively erased. "You've done well to survive. Most of the boundary teams were lost." "What happened with Sophia?" I asked, my voice still weak from the whistle's effect. "Dr. Singh managed to integrate her into the traditional containment framework," he explained, leading us to the central chamber where monitors showed the status of breaches throughout the forest. "She didn't understand what she was doing. The Watchers convinced her she was freeing humanity from artificial constraints. On one of the screens, I could see the main ritual grounds. A complex apparatus of copper and other metals surrounded the stone altar. Above it hovered Sophia, or what remained of her. Her body had transformed into a swirling vortex of light and shadow, roughly human-shaped, but constantly shifting. Tubes and wires connected her to the apparatus, channeling energy. "She's the sacrifice now," Eleanor explained, joining us. Her eyes were bloodshot, dark veins visible beneath her skin, but stabilized within the Blackwood framework. The uncontrolled breaches are being reabsorbed into the central threshold point. The monitors confirmed this. Across the forest, the doorways were closing, reality knitting itself back together, though not perfectly. Distortions remained, areas where our dimension had been permanently altered by contact with the other side. "Will it hold?" I asked. "Sophia didn't choose this role willingly, not in the end. It will hold until the convergence completes its cycle," Martin said heavily. "A few more days. Then we begin preparations for the next cycle." "And Sophia?" Dr. Singh approached, her hands covered in a substance that wasn't quite blood. "Her consciousness remains partially intact within the threshold framework. She exists now as Blackwood has, a bridge between realities." I thought of Blackwood's warning about false ascension, about slavery disguised as godhood. I thought of the Watchers' patient cultivation of human consciousness for their own sustenance. "There has to be another way," I said. "The Watchers aren't invincible. They need us as much as we fear them." Martin looked at me with tired eyes. "Perhaps. But that's research for the next century of the Order. For now, we've contained the convergence once again. The barriers will hold." Outside, the forest continued its slow return to normal. The sky gradually cleared, the spiral vortex dissipating. But I knew appearances were deceiving. Beneath the surface of reality, fundamental changes had occurred. The boundaries had been permanently weakened. The Watchers had gained ground in this cycle, despite our efforts. And I understood with terrible clarity that my involvement with the Luminous Order had only begun. I had glimpsed truths about reality that I couldn't unlearn, seen behind the veil of the world in ways that had permanently altered my perception. The rules would change now. New protocols would be established to account for the weakened barriers, and I would help right them, haunted by the knowledge that our defenses were temporary at best. The Watchers were patient. They would wait for the next convergence, the next opportunity to harvest the consciousness they had so carefully cultivated, and next time, they would remember my name. 3 months have passed since the convergence. Winter has settled over the redwoods, bringing a hush to the forest that feels almost reverent. Snow rarely falls this far west in Humboldt County, but this year is different. White blankets the ritual grounds, concealing the scars where reality tore open and partially healed. I've been appointed to the council, filling the vacancy left by Rebecca Chen, who disappeared during the final containment efforts. We found only her copper amulet hanging from a branch near the central breach, the metal twisted into that familiar spiral pattern. The sanctuary has been rebuilt, reinforced with new alloys developed by Dr. Singh that better resist dimensional distortion. The holographic monitoring system now tracks nearly 300 potential threshold points throughout the forest, triple the number from before the premature convergence. Sophia remains at the center of it all. Her transformed consciousness anchors the barriers between realities, her physical form suspended above the altar in a constant state of flux between human and something else. Sometimes her eyes open, and in those moments I can see awareness there. Not suffering exactly, but a vastness that no human mind was meant to contain. We speak to her, though she rarely responds in ways we can fully comprehend. When she does communicate, her words appear as text on the monitoring systems, often fragmented and disjointed. They continue to watch. Preparation for next cycle accelerated, barriers thinner than before. They learn from each attempt. Martin believes she'll fade as Blackwood did, her consciousness gradually absorbed into the threshold itself. He says it with relief, as if it would be mercy. I'm not so sure. The new rules are more stringent, reflecting our deeper understanding of the Watchers and their methods. All Order members must wear copper-infused clothing when within forest boundaries. No one enters the woods alone, regardless of circle level. Dreams must be recorded and submitted for analysis daily. Any recurring symbols trigger immediate isolation and evaluation. The names of the Watchers, even in cipher script, are sealed in the vault beneath the sanctuary, accessible only to full council members during prescribed astronomical alignments. Threshold monitoring occurs in rotating shifts, no longer than 4 hours. Any member experiencing dimensional bleed symptoms is immediately relieved and treated. Contact with Sophia is limited to council members and restricted to new moon cycles when her consciousness is most coherent. All potential bridge candidates, myself included, undergo weekly quantum resonance testing to monitor compatibility with threshold requirements. I enforce these rules with the fervor of someone who has seen the alternative. My academic dissertation remains eternally in progress, a cover that grows thinner each semester, as Berkeley questions my extended absence. Soon I'll need to make a formal break from my old life. The Order is my world now. At night, when the forest grows quiet and the monitoring systems hum with data, I sometimes stand at the edge of the ritual grounds and look up at the stars. They seem different now, my enhanced perception revealing patterns and movements invisible to ordinary human sight. I wonder if the Watchers originated there, in the spaces between stars, or if they emerged from dimensions so different from ours that directional concepts like up or out have no meaning. And sometimes, in those quiet moments, I hear whispers. My name spoken in that distinctive resonance that bypasses the ear and vibrates directly in the mind, a reminder that I was considered, evaluated, and marked. I follow the rules. I maintain the barriers. I help prepare for the next convergence. But in my dreams, that red door stands waiting, slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of what lies beyond the threshold. And sometimes, God help me, I want to open it wider,